Hi class, this is William. Hopefully all of you have looked at the grade sheet for both the informative and the persuasive speech. You'll notice with each of them that the content of the speech is about 25% of your grade, and the other 75% is delivery. There are 9 elements of delivery, 5 of them vocal, 4 of them physical. The 5 elements of vocal delivery have been covered in another video on vocal delivery. And today in this video, we're going to be talking about the 4 elements of physical delivery. Now, if you've watched the video on vocal delivery, you'll remember that those are not listed in the order of their importance. Energy, for example, is listed last, but is the most important. And towards the end of that video, I talk about what order of importance those 5 elements have. In this video, the physical delivery, these 4 elements are listed in the order of their importance. So let's go ahead and get started. The first element is eye contact. Eye contact is visual engagement with the eyes of your audience. In other words, it's looking people in the eyes. In what we sometimes refer to as mainstream U.S. American culture, eye contact communicates engagement and respect. Now, anytime communication people use that word engagement, what we're talking about is attention and interest. So when you look somebody in the eyes, you're showing them that you're paying attention to them, that you're interested, and that you have respect for them. It's a big reason why Americans tend to trust somebody more if they'll look them in the eyes, and tend to feel a little bit uneasy if the person won't look them in the eyes. It's important to understand that this is cultural. Not every culture has the same view of eye contact. In fact, while Americans tend to view eye contact as a show of respect, some cultures regard extended eye contact as a show of disrespect. Still others see extended eye contact as a show of hostility. So, whenever you're giving a speech to people from another culture, always be mindful that just because eye contact is a good idea in our culture does not mean that it's a good idea in theirs. So you should always take the time to find out how do they interpret extended eye contact. Now, there are a lot of mistakes that people make in eye contact. Probably the single biggest mistake that I've noticed is taking up too many notes with you. Oftentimes they bring up a bunch of notes, and throughout the entire speech, they're virtually reading their speech. They keep looking at their notes, and they'll glance up at the audience, sometimes multiple times per sentence. Then when I give them a grade or an evaluation on their eye contact, the grade is very low. And they go, how could I possibly get a low grade on eye contact? I looked up so many times. And that was the problem. See, if you looked up a bunch of times, that meant by definition you looked down a bunch of times. I don't want you looking up a bunch of times. I want you to keep looking up. In fact, if you have to look at your notes more than, say, every 10 sentences, you probably have not practiced your speech enough. So practicing your speech more and more and limiting yourself to a very sparse outline will help you dramatically with eye contact. While I do not restrict the amount of notes you can have in your speech, I highly recommend that you bring up no more than a single note card with a simple, short outline on that note card. When you look down and you see, okay, next I'm going to be talking about strategy, you can look up and now tell us the strategy. Or you look down and you say, okay, now I'm going to talk about the past. You can look up and tell us about the past. You do not need to keep looking at your notes. The next common mistake that people make with eye contact is they don't look at their notes, actually. In fact, sometimes they don't even have notes, but they don't look at the audience either. They look everywhere else. They look at the ceiling, the floor, the walls, their visual aid, anything but the audience. And then they get their grade back for eye contact, and again, it's a bad grade. And they go, how could I possibly get a bad grade for eye contact? I didn't even have notes. Because eye contact has nothing to do with whether you look at your notes. Eye contact is entirely based on, did you look at the audience? There is no difference between looking at your visual aid, the ceiling, the floor, the walls, or outside, and reading from your notes. They're identical. So keep your focus of your eye contact on your audience. And speaking of visual aids, you should avoid looking at your visual aids. Sometimes people look at visual aids thinking, oh, well, this is basically like I'm not looking at my notes, but their visual aid really are notes. I have, in all my years of teaching public speaking, I have never, ever seen a speaker convince a poster of anything. Your poster, your slides do not need that visual engagement. So keep the visual engagement with the audience. The next common mistake that people make with eye contact is they deliver their entire eye contact to only one or two people in the class or in the audience. The problem with this is in our culture, we look at who we're talking to. So if you only look at two or three people, you're effectively telling everybody else in the audience, I'm not talking to you. So you want your eye contact to be focused on the audience, sporadically spread around the room in no discernible pattern. The second most important element of physical delivery are gestures. Oftentimes people wonder, what am I supposed to do with my hands? And because we don't know what to do with our hands, they become a big distraction. Put them in our pockets, take them out, put them behind our back, run them through our hair. We can actually use our hands very effectively to communicate three things. First of all, we can communicate our message. We communicate our message by, say, counting on our fingers. This allows not only a vocal distinction between, say, the elements of your preview statement, but also a visual one. Or we can show contrast by having our hands close together to show this is small, and then spreading them out to show this is big. On the one hand, where you hold out one hand and say this, and then you put out the other hand and say or that. So we use our hands to communicate our message. Second, we use our hands to communicate emphasis. Traditionally, a long time ago, we used to hit the podium or hit the table to try to add emphasis to something. Well, we don't really beat up furniture anymore. Next came wagging our index finger. If you ever watch old YouTube videos of Theodore Roosevelt giving speeches, you probably have seen this. But that looks a little bit too much like you're lecturing the audience, so we don't really do that one anymore. President Clinton would cup his thumb in his index and middle finger and use that to add emphasis, and Barack Obama used the exact same gesture. Finally, third, we actually use our hands to communicate sincerity. Now, a lot of the research on this has been done with law schools, and law schools have wanted to find out how can our lawyers, or our students when they become lawyers, communicate a message to a jury and be more believed than the opposing lawyer. And one of the things they found, of course, is that eye contact is extremely important, but the second most important element of physical delivery for communicating honesty and sincerity was that they revealed their hands. Putting simply a hand in the pocket or hands behind the back or under the table caused the audience to trust much less. Now, there are a few things we want to avoid doing with our hands. First of all, you should not crack your knuckles while giving a speech. I know that's bad news for some of you, especially if you use cracking knuckles as a way to release tension. Please pick a different one. The problem with cracking our knuckles is the sound of knuckles cracking for some people is very similar to listening to somebody scratch a chalkboard. Well, you do not want that kind of a distraction in your audience's mind just as they're evaluating your message. Second, avoid putting your hands behind your back. Hands behind the back not only conceal the hands, which makes people less likely to trust you, but it also communicates a sense of superiority. Actors oftentimes use hands behind the back if they're playing, say, a corporate CEO or a billionaire or a politician, and they walk around with their hands behind their back as a way for them to communicate that their character believes themselves to be superior to those around them. Well, I can't think of a worse message to send to your audience than you think you're better than they are. As soon as they believe you have that sense of superiority, you're going to lose all of them. Next, you want to avoid using your hands to play with things. Like if you're wearing a hoodie, don't play with your drawstring, don't play with your hair, don't play with the pen. If you're wearing a jacket that has a zipper, don't play with your zipper. You want to avoid doing these things because many people in your audience will be very visually oriented. And anything that you're doing visually, like playing with something, causes them to be distracted away from listening to your speech. And again, we don't want any aspect of our delivery to cause people to pay less attention to our message. The third element of physical delivery is posture. Now this is the simplest one. The posture simply means stand up reasonably straight and don't lean on things. By reasonably straight, I certainly do not mean you have to stand at attention like a U.S. Marine with your shoulders back and down. It just means stand up reasonably straight. The don't lean on things, this includes don't lean on the podium. The podium is designed to hold paper, not people. Don't lean on a chair, don't lean against the wall. Doing these sorts of things communicate a lack of confidence and certainty. Finally, the fourth element of physical delivery is movement. Now, movement is the only one of the 9 elements of delivery, counting vocal and physical, that is what we call a negative form criteria. The other 8 are what we call an affirmative form criteria. An affirmative form criteria means you actually have to do it right. In other words, you have to have eye contact to do eye contact right. You have to have gestures to do gestures right. If you don't gesture, you get a 0 for gestures. You have to have enunciation to do it right. You have to have projection. With movement, as a negative form criteria, you just have to avoid doing it wrong. So if you deliver your entire speech with your feet flat and stationary on the ground and you don't have any distracting movements at all, you get a perfect score for movement because you didn't do it wrong. Now you can walk around, and there are a variety of ways that you can utilize this as an effective means of communicating. You can do what is called walking your points. Walking your points means that you stand and deliver your introduction in the middle, and then when you're transitioning to your first main point, you actually walk to another part of the room, like to the side, and deliver your first main point from there. Then as you transition to the second one, you walk to the other side of the room and deliver it from there. And then for your third main point, you return to the middle. What this does is it allows you to not only provide a verbal or vocal transition, but also a visual one. It also provides a nice visual variety as they're listening to your speech. Now again, this is totally voluntary. You're not going to be graded down for not doing it, but it's just an example of how we can use movement to effectively help us communicate our message. Now we want to avoid certain things. And again, movement as a negative form criteria is more concerned with don't do it wrong. So here's some things that would be wrong. First of all, do not shuffle your feet. This is one that I struggle with personally, so I can relate to it. We want to avoid shuffling our feet because when we do so, we're communicating boredom. It doesn't mean we're actually bored with the topic. It's just simply that's what it communicates. Second, we want to avoid pivoting our feet. Pivoting is where one foot remains stationary and the other one shuffles around, crossing your legs, uncrossing, etc. Next, we want to avoid swaying. Swaying is when our body moves from side to side, almost as if we might fall over. And we want to avoid doing that because the audience will pay less attention to our speech and begin to pay more attention to wondering if we're going to fall over. You also want to avoid excessively shifting weight back and forth. Shifting weight a little bit is okay, but for the most part, try to keep your weight evenly distributed between your feet. We don't want anything that is going to unnecessarily distract the audience. Now, I mentioned before that you can walk your points. You want to avoid pacing. Pacing is when you keep walking and you just don't stop back and forth, and this can become very distracting for an audience. So those are the 4 elements of physical delivery. The other video on vocal delivery will teach you the 5 elements on vocal delivery. Together, those 9 elements of delivery constitute about 75% of your grade on the speeches. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.